Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Coming back for our afternoon session, continuing to look at Nirodha, cessation. And so, yeah, this is not news. You know, we're pretty used to, going over the Buddha's teachings, and it comes up pretty much whatever we're talking about, right? Somewhere in there, we allude to cessation. Somewhere in there, we allude to liberation. We talk about there are these problems, and then we talk about, well, and then there are not the problems, because that's the other side of the scenario. If there was no being free of our defilements, if there was no being free of craving, if there was no being free of suffering, then we just might as well not talk about it. Yeah, because it would just be a downer. But because there is a freedom, because there is cessation, we can talk about, suffering, birth, aging, sickness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. We can talk about them because knowing them, we can also know their absence. We can also know the point at which they are not there. And we can delight in that. And that's, yeah, there's this sentiment, that's it's always permeating through when people lightly grazed by the Buddha's teaching. They're like, suffering, death, ah, defilements. This is, yeah, these people are, they're nuts. This is too grim. I don't want anything to do with it. But you talk to people who actually do the practices, you're like, what are you talking about? This is so wonderful. It's so liberating. I look out and I look at your lives, and it's just like, it's just chaos. It's just is misery. You're all stabbing each other in the back. And I'll never go back. I'll never go back to that insanity. And there's just a disconnect there. But we do become comfortable with it through the practices, through looking at it. That is the way things are. This is not for everybody. Once you get it, and nobody can talk you out of it. And you're like, no, I have had a taste of liberation, and it tasted good. And so that's the direction I'm headed now. And you don't necessarily know how long it'll take to get to the point where the Buddha was at, but you do have pretty quickly a sense that you are headed in the right direction. And why is that? Well, when we talk about things, a Laura or a Ryan or a Jim, these are things that can be quantified. They have characteristics. But if we were to suddenly, Laura's not in her kitchen there, Jim's not in his office, and you would look, that's a non-Laura, a non-Jim. And the interesting thing is whereas Laura's and Jim's are different, the absence of Laura's and Jim's are the same. And so if the Buddha says there is greed, but then he says there is the cessation of greed. Well, you can kind of say, okay, I take it on faith. I don't know what's going on in your mind, but I'll take it on faith that the greed that you have is somehow generally similar to the greed that I have. And I do know when I'm feeling lust, attraction, obsession, fixation with something, and we will call that greed. We may have slightly different greeds, and so the ways of working with it might be different. What works for you might not work for me. But if through practicing and kind of fidgeting with it and trying different approaches, we get to a point where it's like, oh, there's that thing that I usually want, and I don't want it. So this is what that feels like, huh? This is the absence of greed. It is really quite surprising because it doesn't feel, oh, wonderful, there's no shining light. It just feels like, oh, that thing that hurt, it's not hurting right now. And that's all it is. But eventually you start to get the sense when you've seen that enough times and the mind has acclimated to it that wait, that's a good thing. That lack of suffering, that is happiness. That is relief. When I'm suffering, I'm just, all I can think about is how to get out of the suffering, which is right here. This is the place I'm trying to get to when I am suffering. But right now, in the absence of that suffering, I am here. So there's nowhere I have to go. And when we are in that moment of realization, of cessation, realizing that something is not present, we can look at the nearest Buddha and we can say, this is the same cessation that the Buddha experienced. Our greed might be different, but the absence of the greed is the same. And that's a wonderful thing. And the Buddha would say just as much. He'd say there's a difference in the faculties between a Sammasambuddha, a fully enlightened, fully perfectly self-enlightened, all of the honorifics, all of the perfections Buddha, and just your run-of-the-mill arahant who heard him teach the Dhamma and realized and full enlightenment. There is a difference between their faculties and their abilities and the depth of their wisdom and understanding. Sure, some of them, didn't even have the memory to like memorize a full chant. Their fellow monks would get on their back. It was like, how could you this has been years and you still haven't memorized this? And like, yeah. But in terms of the liberation, in terms of the enlightenment, it is the exact same enlightenment that the Buddha had. Whereas the people are different, the freedom from the defilements within those people, that is the same. So there's an interesting thing I'm talking this morning about cessation and kind of getting used to it. Again, we will just keep saying cessation because it is the word that's passed down. And if we change it, we're just going to be tripping over ourselves. So we'll keep using it, but recognizing it's a relative term, right? So when we're looking at something that's causing us suffering, and we begin to strategize, we begin to think, how do I not suffer here? How do I get away from this? At first, we're just doing anything we can do to just not be in the suffering. It doesn't matter if it's skillful or unskillful, we're just trying to get away. But eventually, we start to get a sense of what's causing the suffering. And that's when, rather than just applying a little ointment on top and trying to treat the symptoms, that's when we're actually dealing with the cause of the problem. And from time to time, we'll be able to experience it being gone. Now, from our perspective, this is cessation. I was feeling obsession with this one thing, and now I am not. That obsession has ceased, right? But from the perspective of somebody who just walks in the room, it's just an absence. It's not a cessation. It's the same. We were talking about the simile of the palm tree, the palm stump that shows up in the Pali Canon. If you were part of this effort to obliterate that palm stump, to cut it and burn it and rake it over and bury it, then you would say the palm tree ceased. But if the next day somebody came in from out of town, they would walk into that courtyard and they would say, there is no palm tree. It wouldn't be a cessation for them. It would just be, there is no palm tree. It is absent. And so this actually is useful to us in investigating the causes of our suffering, because this is one of the tricks that the mind plays on us, the part of delusion, that we have become so accustomed to things being present that often when they're not, there can still be a disbelief in the mind that it's really gone. And like Chutta was talking about how, something can be gone for a while, and then you can have the thought like, oh, hey, that one thing is gone. And that's usually just a few moments later, there it is again, up, as though I summoned it. Yeah, and it's really, it's more useful to at that moment to look back and say, how long was it gone? How long was it absent? It may be that now I'm thinking about it, and yeah, now the obsession, I can kind of still feel it, burning a little bit there. But for minutes, for hours, for days, I was not thinking about that object. I was not feeling any attraction towards that object. I was completely free of any craving for that object. What was it? What was happening? And we would have to use our memory. We'd have to look back and we'd have to say, well, I was doing this and I was doing that and I was doing that. At that moment, we can have that realization, wait, all of those activities are free of that craving, right? That craving did not exist. It wasn't just there waiting all that time. Yeah. It arose based on certain conditions now, but before, during that time when I wasn't suffering over it, it was not there. And this is the nature of craving, of aversion, of delusion, right? They're a problem when they're present, but when they're not, there is no problem. And we tend not to think about it. But then when they are there, we start asking the question, how do I get rid of it? And it's very tricky, because even figuring out what it is part of the effort. If I were to open my window and look outside into the bushes, would I see a craving staring back at me? No, this is not a trick question. No, there's no craving outside the window. There's no craving down the street. There's no, even in places where cravings tend to arise, like the place where we have lunch. Even if I were to go in there right now, there'd be no cravings walking around, just waiting to pounce on people. A craving is not a thing. In several discourses between the Buddha or between various enlightened disciples, they ask the question, like, what is the craving? Is the craving in the object, or is the craving in the person that sees the object? And the Buddha or the teacher would say, it is neither. The desire and attraction of that person for the object, that is the craving there. But then what does craving look like? You can't, it doesn't look like anything. It's when a person feels a desire for something, we call that craving. There is no thing. It is not in the person. It is not in the object. It is kind of dependent on both. And it's very interesting, because a lot of the times we think that a craving is just waiting to get us, when in reality, we only have half of the scenario right now. We have the subject, we have the me, and we're worried that a craving is going to arise if we're presented with a certain object, but we can't find the craving anywhere to obliterate it, to crush it, to burn it, to grind it up, to cover it over with dirt. We want to get rid of it so that it won't cause us problems in the future, but there is nothing to be found. And yet that object comes around and boom, suddenly there's the craving. Where was it before? Yeah. And so this is part of the practice that we do. We can be told to look for cessation, to delight in it, to work at eradicating the causes of our suffering. And yet we keep asking, how do I do this? Give me steps. 6 steps, 8 steps, 12 steps. I do not care how many steps. Just give me a how-to guide for getting rid of these things. But the thing is, as soon as you do step 1, maybe it disappears. Maybe you got away from the object and the craving is not present at the moment. The only thing that's there is this latent tendency towards the craving, so that it'll show up again in the past. And so dealing with that it's actually not that complicated. You see, the first part of realizing cessation is just appreciating even that moment. Yeah, when the object disappears and we're not feeling a craving for the object, or an aversion towards the object, or confusion about the object, if we're not feeling that at the moment, then the cycle is not complete. You would say, in this moment, I am not feeling that. That particular defilement is not arising. Mm-hmm. So this is a kind of cessation that we can apply our mind to. We don't have to be like on a crusade, like, no, but the causes are still there. So the craving is still there. This is not the way that we look at our mind. We note what is present and what is absent. And the underlying causes of something and the thing itself are two different things. So we can still develop an appreciation and a delight in the fact that, well, okay, I got away from that thing I was feeling craving towards. And now I'm not feeling the craving towards it. It seems pretty simple, right? It's pretty basic arithmetic, you know. You're feeling craving towards bagels. That's what came up this morning. Feeling craving towards bagels. And so you get away from bagels. And gradually the craving towards bagels subsides. You can appreciate that. You can turn your mind to that and say, here I am up in my office, not feeling craving towards bagels. It has subsided. This is wonderful. All I had to do was get some seclusion from it. And this is the beginning. Yeah. It is, but it can be a trap that we fall in if we start looking up the chain of dependent origination and saying, look, I don't want to feel that craving again. How do I get rid of it? It's not really gone. Well, it is gone. It is gone in the moment. And through the greater and greater appreciation of it being gone, we can start to make progress towards the higher levels of cessation, where even the underlying causes are gone. But if we stop ourselves part way and we say, no, the causes are still there. Oh, this craving is just always with me. It's just always coming up. Well, this is a kind of view. This is a kind of set of beliefs that we're taking on that will get in the way. Yeah. So as we're thinking about cessation, it's useful for us to consider what underlying ideas do we have towards ourselves, towards, how much do we believe that we can be free of this thing that is causing us suffering? Yeah? If you were to go up to just anybody on the street, any untaught, worldly person, and you were to investigate, do things change? The average person probably doesn't even perceive change. They don't perceive impermanence. They'd be like, what is changing? I go to sleep at night and then I wake up and the body is the same body. I go to work every day. I eat the same food. I like this. I don't like that. My favorite color is this. It's always been that. My memories. It's always the same memories, right? And in a way, it makes a sort of logical sense, right? I'm not always thinking about my memories, but every time I do try to remember something, the memory is there. That means the memory is always there, right? It's stable. Every day I go to smoke a cigarette, or I go to eat a sandwich, or I go to take a shower, and it's the same. I do it the same way every day. So therefore, my habits are stable. And the average person perceives a stable entity moving through time. Once we hear the teachings and we hear about impermanence, we start to be that guy that goes up and is like, what are you talking about? This body you're inhabiting now. When you were a child, was it the same body? Was it the same height? Did it have the same facial hair? Was your eyesight the same? Or has the body changed? I'm like, well, the body changed. And it's like, so how about this? You're eating a piece of cake. Does it taste good? It's like, yeah, I like cake. You're eating a second. Well, yeah, that'd be great. You're eating your 15th piece of cake. Does it still feel good? Like, no, that'd be awful. That'd be painful. So cake is awful now. You see, even that feeling changed. You're like, your memories, really? They don't change? Those things that you would thought were so cool and you couldn't stop thinking about when you were a child. Now that you're a grown adult, do you still think they're so cool and you can't stop thinking about them? Or has your perspective on them changed? The object in your memory is the same, but yet the flavor, the whole idea of the memory has changed. You'd be like, even habits, even your very consciousness, this is changing all the time. And this is a kind of wisdom that we get over time, right? And we start to be that guy. You'd be like, no, it's all impermanent. It's all changing all the time. It's shifting, the little things arising and ceasing. It's easy to say, arising and ceasing, but how much do we actually embody that? How much do we actually really believe in that such that it stays with us wherever we go? Do we see ourselves as just arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing? Well, if you do, then you extend that also to just what is present here and now. If at the moment a craving is not here and now, then in this moment you are free of that craving. If in this moment you're not feeling aversion, well, great. In this moment, there's no ill will in me. And that is enough, because many of us, it's easy to fall into these patterns. They're like, I am an aversive person. And I'd be like, well, you seem pretty friendly to me. And it's like, well, yeah, no, we're on good terms, but I mean, just give me a few minutes and I'm sure I'll be upset about something. And you're like, but that means you're not an aversive person. Maybe you're prone to aversion, but at this moment, you're a friendly person. Your aversion is absent in this moment, and that is enough to kind of shatter the whole idea you're not even a person. You're just a bag of conditions, constantly changing, constantly arising and ceasing. And this is not as insane as it sounds. And I'm sure anybody just walking in here would say that sounds plenty insane. It sounds like you have no sense of who you are or what you like. It's actually not like that. It is a sort of mindfulness we develop, an appreciation of peace. Again, it's easy to talk about peace, happiness and bliss and quiet and simplicity and all of these wonderful yoga words that we can use to try to, ease ourselves into this nice, relaxed, chill kind of state, right? But what is peace? Well, peace is all around us. There are so many forms of suffering that are not here right now. But it is just as it's up to us, this subject-object interaction, for a craving to arise. It's up to us to appreciate the peace, the absence of the suffering that is also arising. And yeah, so the thing is, and we were just talking about this right before starting the reflection, the mind needs objects. Yeah, the mind thinks with objects. A thought is a kind of object, but also a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch. These are also objects that the mind can use to think about ideas, to work things out. It's kind of like it's kind of like a young child playing with figures, dolls, they acting out little situations. In a way, this is a pretty effective way for a child or anybody to understand something. If you don't understand how a particular machine works, sometimes you just get the parts and you just have to kind of like, okay, well, this turns this and that makes this turn on, which powers that. And this is very relevant. This is something I've been doing lately, trying to get a washing machine going and tracing all the little wires and figuring out what part is not working. Yeah, sometimes you actually need the stuff. Well, it's the same thing. This is how our mind works. Yeah, so when we're looking for freedom, when we're looking for peace, it doesn't do us any good to just try to find a blank space, an empty space, a void, and walk over there and plop ourselves down and be like, okay, finally, I have peace. it probably won't be that peaceful. It'll probably feel like trying to stuff our mind into a little box and throw it in the closet. Yeah. Like you've been causing problems, you're getting a timeout. Just shove it off to the side. Yeah, it works for a cat, but for our minds, our mind is perfectly capable of suffering wherever we put it. Yeah? So in order to fully appreciate cessation, we still have to have objects for our mind to process. And it's all leading up to what do we do? The interesting thing about the third noble truth is just like that picture. So the people in the house and the tree is cessation is not empty. Actually, Nibbana is full of stuff. It's full of Lauras and Jims and Satine the cats and pens. It's full of all sorts of stuff. Everything is in Nibbana because Nibbana is the absence of stuff and everything can fit within it. Yeah. But our mind can't really process that in the same. It can appreciate it. It can be like, oh, that's peaceful, that's sublime, that's relaxed. There's no suffering in Nibbana. Yeah. Well, actually, all the sufferings in Nibbana. But then again, we're not talking about all of the world's suffering. What's really important is our experience. Yeah. Do we suffer? Often when we're not suffering, we just don't even notice it because this is the function of the mind. It's not good at noting the absence of something. And when we experience happiness, we note it, right? We mark it on our calendar and we try to figure out how to get back there later. You're like, oh, on June 16th, 2018, I was so happy. And ever since then, I've been trying to figure out why. I've been eating the same food. I've been going to the same places. I've been watching the same television show over and over and over again, trying to figure out why I was happy. And I still haven't figured it out. Yeah. Well, this is not the way we relate to happiness. Yeah. In the Four Noble Truths. If our happiness is coming from the absence of something, then we have to have stuff there to see, to note the absence of it. And the wonderful thing about the mind is once we get used to this, is there is always stuff in the states that are free of suffering. We're just not used to thinking of them as this is a state that is free of a particular suffering. We tend to just think of it as this is this. But say we have contentment. Yeah, when we have contentment, is it possible to feel greedy? You've all been here long enough. It is like, no, they're polar opposites, right? Greed and obsession and contentment and relaxation, these are two different things. And the thing is, you can only be in one at a time, unless you're some sort of schizophrenic. But even still, I think you would just be switching very quickly between them. Yeah. So you can only do one at a time. So when you are feeling contentment, even if you really can't fully process just what level of craving I have right now, or what level of tendency towards craving I have right now, you don't even have to. You can begin to say, when I feel contentment, these following states are not present: greed, attraction, lust, obsession, fanaticism. You could make a whole long list, and you don't even have to check for them, right? Because you know that these things can't coexist with contentment. So you get to a place of contentment, and even if it's a small contentment, if it's a cold day and you come inside and the house is warm, and suddenly you're like, there is a moment there of just perfect contentment. We usually immediately destroy it by going and checking our phone or getting something to eat. But if you were to just pause right there, you'd be like, oh, in just this moment, I'm good. My mind was just completely taken over by wanting to get in from the cold. But this is where I was trying to get to. I was trying to get to this moment where now I am in from the cold and I am warm, and it is nice. And in that moment where you feel contentment, You don't even have to pull out your checklist, but you can say to yourself, wow, all that wanting is not here right now. This is a state free of wanting. The wanting has ceased. Yeah. Same with anger. Many of us deal with anger or frustration or annoyance. The list can go on and on, all of these different mind states, and be like, wow, it's really easy for me to get ticked off. Yeah, I can't even turn on the news or surf the internet or do anything, and I just get ticked off at stuff. But then, do we notice the times when we're not turning on the news? Do we notice the times when we're not surfing the internet? Do we notice the times when we're just walking through a hallway or going to the bathroom or just calmly eating our lunch? Do we say to ourselves in those moments, wow, I'm not ticked off right now. This is a non-ticked off state. This is a not frustrated, not annoyed, not angry state. But even more than that, what if we could say, anytime that we have a friendly interaction, we pat ourselves on the back and we say, in that moment, there was no anger present. We should. It's not too simple an exercise. It is a fantastically powerful exercise because it will shatter our sense of self, right? In that moment, we are not an angry person. In that moment, any argument our mind might be holding onto, building a narrative that I am a person prone to anger, it cannot apply. So we say, oh, that was pretty friendly of me. Suddenly we're a whole different person in that moment. And we can go down the list. So many mind states, we're not there and are not there. So we can get acclimated and associated to the absence of suffering that accompanies various states. And as you practice with the Eightfold Path, this is exactly what you're doing. The Eightfold Path is basically a guide. It is literally a path. If you walk down this path, you will get to this destination of freedom from suffering. But it involves not stepping off the path. And yeah, it prescribes some things. Yeah. You got to stop killing, stealing, cheating, lying, drinking. Yeah. You've got to look at how you make your livelihood and is it harming other people? You got to look at how you speak to others. Yeah. How you represent yourself and even how you use your mind. Yeah, it prescribes different things, but you will find it's not that you just have to drop everything that you've been doing up until now because it's not working, but you can start to go through and be like, when I am reading books, I am not angry, aversive, annoyed, frustrated, deluded. I'm just reading a book. And so you can put that on your list. This is okay. This is not a problem. When I'm eating food, when I'm going to the bathroom, these are times when a variety of mind states are absent. And then looking for the cessation of suffering is really not a chore. It's happening all the time. Now, if it sounds familiar, the Buddha does talk about this. In the Satipatthana Sutta, Buddha says, being mindful of your body as it moves through the various postures. Now it's standing, now it's walking, now it's sitting down, now it's lying down. Being mindful of the body as you do different activities. You're going forward or you're going backwards. You're coming or you're going. You're extending your limbs or you're drawing them in. You're eating. You're going to the bathroom. You're taking a walk. You're laying down. Yeah, you take a shower. You drive somewhere. How many of these activities, as they're presented, they don't necessarily have any kind of mind state associated with them? They're just normal ho-hum mind states. But if they have no particular mind state associated with them, then why would you assume that they have any kind of defilement associated with them? The fact of the matter is, most of our day, we are not obsessed with the defilements. We're just heedless. We're just not paying attention. Whereas if we were paying attention, then the only possible defilement is not there. All that would be there is us being mindful. So in terms of finding these places of cessation, sometimes it's just pick a wholesome mind state, be it mindfulness, be it contentment, be it goodwill, be it compassion, be it dispassion towards the world, be it contemplation, be it meditation, any of these, just pick it and be like, okay, yeah, when I do that, I don't have to worry about defilements creeping around in the bushes outside. They're just not going to be there. They will not be present. Yeah. Then all it will take is when we are doing that activity for us to for some reason, this realization to actually occur to us in the moment. Like, this is what non-greed feels like. This is what non-aversion feels like. And we can get used to it. We put a new label on an old activity. And as we do this more and more, we'll start to say, well, what if I were to take my entire schedule throughout the day and have it be nothing but the activities that I've realized are free of various kinds of defilements? What would happen to the defilements then? Well, I mean, if I'm doing this and that's free of defilements, and then I'm doing that and it's free of defilements, I'm doing that, well, there would be no defilements during the day because they can't coexist once when I'm doing these wholesome activities. It's actually a pretty relaxed scenario to get to nibbana, isn't it? Just do the wholesome stuff, and then you don't have to worry about doing the unwholesome stuff, right? So it's a thought. These are just a couple of thoughts to sprinkle in there, and now we can do our afternoon meditation session. So sitting and walking, and if you want to come back, so at 3:30, no, at 4:30 p.m. Eastern time, we usually come back, and anybody who's still here, we can just open it up to discussion, or if nobody has anything, we can just wrap it up, say our sadhus, and head on our way. Okay.